The hollow, chilling feeling lingered like a ghostly companion as Charlie Bloom went about his morning routine. Not even the steaming water of the shower felt warm enough. He lingered in the shower for a while, contemplating the source of this feeling, a dream. The details of this dream were still fresh and vivid in his mind. He had been lost in the desert on a moonless night, and suddenly this horrible grinding noise shattered the stillness. He grew very panicked as the grinding noise grew louder. His panic reached a peak, causing him to race into the desert waste. A terribly hollow and cold feeling of hopelessness came over Charlie's dream self as he ran into the desert. It felt like the desert was the maw of some hungry beast swallowing him. He awoke from this nightmare when the grinding noise, a noise like an engine's various parts rattling together at high speed, reached what seemed to be an ear-shattering crescendo. Never had a nightmare dwelled on him as this one. Never had a nightmare seemed so real to him as this one. It gnawed at his mind like pesky vermin that would dart away into dark corners as soon as he tried to apprehend them. Then, when he let his guard down, sure that the pest was gone, it would resurface and gnaw away at him again. Regardless, Charlie loaded up his few belongings in a brown duffel bag. A change of clothes, toothbrush and toothpaste, a Zippo lighter that he came across during his wandering travels, and a picture of his family that was taken 10 years ago on a disposable camera. He and Clara had been on a vacation, a road trip. The disposable camera was a lark, a playful homage to those old days before everyone used smartphones or digital cameras. They had purchased it at some gas station in the back of the Beyond. Charlie always set the picture on the motel nightstand beside him when he went to bed, and it was the last thing he looked at before he carried on with his travels. In the photo, he hugged Clara, kissing her on the cheek, and she looked at the camera, smiling, hugging him back. Dim, dead days, Charlie thought. Gone forever. The thought of the word dead made him wince a little, reminding him of his dream. He shook his head, as if shaking the thought away, scattering the vermin away to the shadowy corners. Then he zipped up the bag and took the key to the office for checkout. As he stood on the curb near the motel parking lot, he looked about for someone he could hitch a ride with. Miles and miles of Nevada desert lay ahead, and he would much rather ride than walk it, and he didn't want to start walking and end up not getting a ride. If his dream did have any meaning, he hoped it wasn't a premonition of dying in the desert of dehydration. Charlie didn't know where he was going. He was a drifter. Sometimes he panhandled. He worked a couple jobs sweeping floors and running a cash register. He found ways to get money from time to time. If one were to ask Charlie why he lived the way he lived, he would most likely tell that person that he didn't know why. He might elaborate on some feel-good nonsense about the adventure of the next town and the unexpected. Down deep, though, down in the places where the mental vermin hid and bred in the dark corners of the mind, Charlie was testing fate. He was testing the powers that be to see if they'd step in and save him somehow. A blonde woman stepped out of her motel room and stood on the curb. Charlie watched her for a moment as she struggled to light a cigarette with a book of matches. Fingering the Zippo lighter in his pocket, he walked over to her. He still had about $100 in his wallet. Maybe he could pay her 50 of it to give him a ride to the next town. Charlie pulled the lighter out, snapped it open, clicked the flame alive, and lit her smoke. She eyed him gratefully, inhaled smoke, exhaled, and murmured a raspy thank you. Acne and a few scabs cratered this woman's pallid and nearly emaciated face. Her eyes were green and tinged with a tired grayness, like all the memories held within her eyes were gradually deteriorating. Her blonde hair was thin and matted, and seemed to make a struggled tumble down her shoulders and back, as if her hair loathed the touch of the body below. No problem, Charlie said, snapping the Zippo closed and tucking it away in his pocket. How was your night? The woman shrugged her shoulders. Same as always. Couldn't sleep worth a damn. You? Charlie chuckled. Mankind's greatest struggle, he said. The torment of finding rest. The woman cynically moaned, took another drag of the cigarette, and then tossed it to the asphalt. Nearby, a couple was loading their bags in the boot of their car. The words "just married" were smeared on the back window. Well, thanks again for the light. I've got to pack up and get out of here. Got some company waiting for me in Nedston. My sister. She's worried about me. The woman raised her eyebrows with slight annoyed emphasis. Then she began to turn to her motel room doorway. Well, you think I could get a ride with you? I happen to be headed in that direction, too. Nedston's north, isn't it? I've got a $50 bill for you. The woman glanced at him, a cynical smile on her face, exposing brownish, stained teeth. A little something in it for the both of us. What the hell are you going to Nedston for? It's practically a glorified trailer park. I don't know, Charlie said. It's calling to me. I guess I'll find out when I get there. The woman laughed, rasping with sardonic enthusiasm. Charlie imagined a witch standing before him. One of those type, eh? She said. Lost to never be found. Sure, I'll give you a ride. Let me pack up first. Charlie waited out on the curb for a few minutes. He watched others load up in their cars, a kid crying to his dad about a toy he wished to have from his bag, but the father stoically ignored the child. He watched a woman walk stiffly alongside her husband, her head hung low as if they'd received disappointing news or had endured an argument before coming out of the room. Charlie took it all in, thinking about how many of these people had something they were interconnected with, grounding them. He floated about life like debris after a massive shipwreck. Then the image from his dream, falling into the black throat of the desert, emerged in his mind. His mind was like an abandoned house, decaying and crumbling, and thoughts, like this dream, were the stirring shadows of the wandering pests that inhabited it. They had devoured away by now most of what remained of innocence and wholesomeness. The feeling of being hollowed out and refilled with an ice-cold chill returned. It was a feeling like an ice-cold hand gently massaging his heart. He shivered. All right, let's hit the road. The woman appeared, carrying some bags. Charlie, having only his one duffel bag, took one of hers and helped her load it all in the trunk of the red Honda parked at the edge of the lot. Thoughts of the death vision scurried away again to the back of his mind, and they got on their way. The woman's name was Cynthia. Not at all the name Charlie imagined for her. He imagined Margaret or Rochelle. Cynthia seemed too gentle and nice to him, but such was reality. They stopped at a gas station and began their drive north. It would be a long 12-hour drive. Nedston was clear in Idaho. They unveiled one another's life stories during the drive. Cynthia had been living the life of a drifter for the past 5 years. She was really 23 years old, but she looked to be 33 from the smoking and some of the other drugs she was doing. At 19, Cynthia had gotten pregnant with her boyfriend. He had dumped her and disappeared, and she panicked and became depressed, began struggling with drinking and other drugs, which ended up killing the baby. She felt so guilty and embarrassed by what happened that she ran away from home, hitchhiking and staying with whoever would let her stay on their couch. Eventually, one of her sisters was able to track her down, because a girl she had stayed with ended up moving to Idaho and worked at the same retail store where Cynthia's sister worked. Small world, big surprise. Charlie then told her about his experience. 5 years ago, he had discovered that his wife was having affairs behind his back. He had been laid off from his job, and this had caused some stress in the home. His wife had decided to cope with the issue by sleeping with several different men, which flabbergasted Charlie. He had never imagined a woman behaving this way. It also angered him. The day he found out about the affairs, he exploded with fury, shattering several dishes on the kitchen floor. The memory of it was somewhat a blur at this point. He remembered a lot of senseless yelling at one another. He remembered his wife saying she was happy that she heard him, and that she never loved him anyway. He swore at her, kicked around a bit, and eventually took the old Buick and drove until he ran out of gas. Then he started walking and never turned back. By the time the sun was beginning to set, they were now near the edge of Nevada, about to enter Utah. They were driving along some out-of-the-way highway that Cynthia apparently knew about, but Charlie felt quite lost, which was fine. A life adrift was a lost life. "We've still got another, 9 hours, she said. "Probably ought to stop somewhere at some point for the night," Charlie added. "Yeah," Cynthia said, with an uncertain tone in her voice. Darkness descended over the surrounding desert. The cold, hollow feeling had continued to linger with Charlie throughout the trip. When he saw the darkness fall like a curtain over the surrounding desert, the dream came back to his mind. He wondered if this desert might be a beast, and it was awakening. He gazed out the passenger window. He could still see faint silhouettes of cactus and brush. The mountains in the distance looked like jagged teeth. There were plenty of mysteries hidden away in the desert. How many people had wandered far out in the wastes, only to die, and now their bones were scattered about by scavenging animals? How many murder victims' bodies were tossed away deep in the desert valley like discarded trash, with no one ever again knowing of their whereabouts? What monsters lay out there? What mysterious beasts or cryptids roam under the blanket of night in the desert waste? So much was unknown out there. "I've seen some pretty odd stuff out here in the desert," Cynthia said, as if she had been reading his thoughts. "I've driven through this area a lot at night, or hitchhiked with others. Seen some crazy shit." Charlie was uncertain whether he wanted to explore further into what she was saying, but he found himself inquiring anyway. "Like what?" he asked. "One time I was riding with this truck driver, and we saw this burst of green lights in the sky right in front of us," she said. "It was bright, like green flames in the sky. There was this other time I joined some people out in the desert around here for a rave. We heard this strange howl out in the darkness, a sound like nothing we'd ever heard before. It wasn't wolf or coyote or anything like that. It had like this weird raspiness to it. I don't know exactly how to describe it. Some of the stuff you've seen in the sky could be the military testing out new aircraft or missile technology. I know there are some military bases in the Nevada area," Charlie said. He tried to sound calm and nonchalant, but in truth, his heart was pounding, and cold chills stirred on his back. Something was wrong. He didn't know what exactly, but he could feel it. A feeling like some kind of strange electricity was in the air. The car began to stutter. "What the?" Cynthia said. She pumped the gas pedal. The car was slowing rapidly. "Are we out of gas?" Charlie said, nervous tension rising in his voice. "No, I still had 3/4 tank left," Cynthia said. She pulled the car to the side of the road. The engine completely died. "Shit!" Cynthia exclaimed harshly under her breath. She tried starting the car a couple times. The engine wouldn't even turn over. She cursed again, smacking the steering wheel. "Well, we're not in a good situation," Charlie said. His pounding heart felt like a berserk prisoner in the cage of his chest cavity. "Do you have a cell phone?" "I don't." "I do. I will try to call someone." Cynthia grabbed her cell phone from the center console and pressed the finger ident to access it. The screen remained blank. Charlie heard her moan in disappointment. Her breathing intensified. "The battery is dead. I got to find the charger." She began rummaging around the center console and checking at the footwell. Charlie nervously bit his lower lip, a habit of his whenever feelings of fear increased within him. The surrounding darkness felt like a wall pressing upon them. A loud, buzzing noise caused the both of them to jolt and freeze. "What's that?" It started out fairly mild and distant, but consistently grew louder until the noise was completely upon them. By that point, it was almost like a jackhammer pounding upon the car. A white light illuminated the scene around them, and Cynthia shrieked in startlement. "What the hell is that thing?" "I don't know." The car began to rattle and shake, tossing side to side. A crack began to carve its way through the windshield. "What is it?" Cynthia repeated this question, breaking into a panic. She was hyperventilating, constantly shifting in her seat, looking around the car. Charlie remained frozen, uncertain what to say or what to think. All he could do was gaze at the forming cracks in the windshield in paralyzing terror. Then Cynthia jumped out of the car and ran across the road. "Cynthia, no!" Charlie yelled. He watched in painful horror as a strange appendage darted upon her, jabbing into her back, crumpling her to the macadam. Other appendages swarmed around her body. She screamed. Her agonized screams were accompanied by ripping, crunching, and sucking noises. Charlie watched it all in a moment of frozen horror, his brain not fully comprehending the reality of what was happening. Then the appendages detached from her body, and he saw the mangled, crumpled mess that remained of her. Some blood was smeared around what remained of her body. She was completely unrecognizable. Charlie's paralysis broke. He jumped free from the car and ran to the darkness of the desert, mumbling a prayer to himself as brush and rocks crackled and thudded under his footsteps. "Please, God! Please, God! Help me, God!" He glanced behind him once and caught a glimpse of it. The entity looked like a giant mechanical spider with an egg-shaped body that glowed like white phosphorescence, and black legs overhung from the orb. The black appendages didn't move it along, however. The entity floated. Charlie ran. The black desert night swallowed him in its unmerciful jaws. At one point his foot struck a rock, and he collapsed with a painful thud. He turned to see the egg-shaped orb descend upon him, growing menacingly brighter as it did. Charlie cried out and raised his hands in surrender. The moment the needle-like appendages jabbed into his chest and stomach, he felt no pain. He simply watched in wide-eyed shock. Then the pain came. Pain that was so intense it was blinding, like a white-hot flame absorbing his body. He screamed and writhed, but soon he was incapacitated by it. He watched his chest cavity flatten as the appendages sucked out all of his internal organs and portions of his rib cage. This was the last thing he saw before he died. The darkness of death swallowed him.